The boy who disappeared at Lake George, and the miracle 38 years later. The phone rang at 11 o'clock at night, just as I was getting ready for bed. At 75, late-night calls rarely bring good news, so my heart clenched with worry when I saw my daughter's name on the screen. Emily never called this late without a serious reason. Her voice was trembling, as if she'd been crying or was in a state of deep shock. I could hear her trying to control her breathing, taking pauses between words, as if gathering strength to say something incredible. She asked me to sit down, which always means bad news. At my age, I've lived long enough to understand that when your 46-year-old adult child asks you to sit before a conversation, life is about to turn upside down. I sank onto the edge of my bed, gripping the phone with sweaty palms. Emily spoke slowly, as if each word caused her physical pain. She had received the results of a DNA test she'd taken a few weeks ago, just for fun. And there, among the list of distant relatives, was a close relative shown. Very close. A brother, a man 43 years old, which exactly matched the age Jamie would be now, if he were alive. I felt the ground disappear from under my feet. The room swam before my eyes, and I desperately grabbed the bed frame. This was impossible. Absolutely impossible. My son Jamie had drowned 38 years ago, when he was only 5 years old. We searched for him for a week. We buried an empty coffin. We had mourned him for almost 4 decades. But Emily continued, and her voice carried the same bewilderment that had overwhelmed me. The match was 100%. The system showed this was her full brother, sharing both parents. A man named David Clark from Vermont, exactly the age Jamie would be now. I kept repeating that it was impossible, that there must be a lab error, mixed up samples or data. But inside, something trembled with hope that I didn't dare allow. What if? What if by some miracle? Emily was telling me details in a shaking voice, but I could barely hear her words anymore. Time had turned backward, and I was back on the shore of Lake George in that cursed summer of 1986. The day that divided our lives into before and after. The day our family lost its heart. We had come to the lake for a long weekend in early August. Tom was working a lot in those years, building his business. And this was one of the rare opportunities to spend time as a family without rush and phone calls. We had been looking forward to this trip for months, planning it carefully. The weather was perfect, sunny but not hot, with a gentle breeze. Lake George in August was particularly beautiful. Clear blue water reflected the green Adirondack Mountains, creating a postcard landscape that took your breath away. We stayed in a small motel near the lake, but spent most of our time on the beach. The children were absolutely delighted. 8-year-old Emily was already a good swimmer and felt like a fish in water. 5-year-old Jamie was still learning, but loved splashing in the shallows, building sandcastles, and collecting pretty stones. He was such a lively, curious child, always exploring something, asking a million questions, laughing at every little thing. That morning, we found a wonderful spot on the lakeshore. A wide, sandy beach gently sloped into water that was crystal clear and surprisingly warm for a mountain lake. We could see the bottom several feet ahead, the perfect place for a family with young children. Tom started unloading the car. We had a lot of things: a large blanket, folding chairs, a sun umbrella, a cooler with food and drinks, beach toys, towels, sunscreen. We planned to spend the entire day on the shore. I began setting up the things we'd already brought. I spread out the blanket, got out the sand toys, started unpacking food from the bags. The children, as soon as they saw the water, immediately asked to go swimming. I let them go in just a little bit while we were getting settled. Emily and Jamie ran to the water just a few yards from me. I constantly glanced in their direction, making sure they didn't go in too deep. The water really was shallow near the shore. It barely reached the children's knees. A safe, calm place. Emily immediately became absorbed in building a grand sandcastle. She was such a serious girl when it came to creative work. She could spend hours building, drawing, or sculpting, completely immersed in the process. Jamie splashed nearby, playing with sticks and pebbles, mumbling something to himself. He had a habit of narrating all his actions. Tom went to the car for the rest of our things. He needed to bring another cooler, the beach umbrella, and folding chairs. He planned to make several trips to carry everything at once. I continued setting up our spot, occasionally calling out to the children, reminding them not to go too deep. Everything was absolutely calm and safe. A typical family idyll that thousands of families experience every weekend across the country. Tom returned about 15 minutes later with the remaining things. We both looked toward the water to check on the children and saw only Emily, concentrating on her architectural masterpiece. Jamie was nowhere to be seen. At first, we didn't panic. Children are children. Probably he'd wandered off looking for prettier stones or decided to explore something interesting along the shore. We called his name. No answer. Emily looked up from her castle. Her face showed surprise and slight worry. She said Jamie had just been right there, next to her, playing in knee-deep water. She pointed to a spot a few yards from herself that looked just as shallow and safe as the rest of this part of the shore. Tom and I exchanged glances, and anxiety began creeping into my heart. We started calling louder, running along the shore, looking behind every rock, every tree. There weren't many other vacationers, but those who were nearby joined the search. Half an hour passed. Jamie was nowhere to be found. Someone among the vacationers called the Water Rescue Service. I remember how my heart was pounding, how my mouth went dry, but I still hoped this was a misunderstanding. That he would come out from behind the trees with an armful of pretty stones and ask in surprise why everyone looked so worried. The first rescuers arrived in 20 minutes. These were local volunteers with motorboats. They began combing the lake waters while we and other people continued searching along the shore. By evening, a Coast Guard helicopter had arrived, and the next day, professional divers came. The search turned into a real operation. Rescue services from 3 counties combined their efforts. Volunteers arrived in groups, local residents, tourists, just caring people who learned about the missing child from the news. We were taken aside and told about the features of Lake George. Despite the apparent safety of this section of shore, the lake had a complex bottom topography. In some places, there were underwater holes and unexpected drop-offs. But most importantly, a river flowed out of the southern part of the lake, creating underwater currents. The rescuers theorized that the child might have accidentally stepped into one of these underwater holes, gotten caught in the current, and been carried toward the river mouth. From there, the current could have carried him far downstream, dozens of miles toward the town of Glens Falls and beyond. The search expanded. Now rescue services were combing not only the lake, but the river for many miles. Divers investigated every section of the bottom. Helicopters flew over the entire shoreline. Groups of volunteers walked hundreds of miles of riverbank on foot. But the river was long, with many tributaries and hard-to-reach areas, especially in the mountainous part of Vermont. I don't remember much from those days. I only remember the endless waiting, hope that grew weaker with each hour. I remember the faces of the rescuers, who became more sympathetic and less optimistic each day. Tom barely slept, constantly rode with the rescue groups, demanded they expand the search area, bring in more people. Emily sat quiet and confused, blaming herself for not watching her brother. I swung between despair and hope, clinging to every straw. On the fourth day, divers found a child's t-shirt caught on a log about 2 miles from our vacation spot. Closer to the river mouth, the shirt was similar to what Jamie had been wearing, but we couldn't be sure. Thousands of such shirts were sold. The search continued for 3 more days. By the end of the week, it became clear that the chances of finding Jamie alive were practically zero. The head of the rescue operation explained the reality of the situation to us. If the child really had been caught in the current and carried by the river, his body could be anywhere along many miles of waterway. In cold water, a body might not surface for weeks, and underwater obstacles and currents could carry it very far. Officially, the search continued for several more days, but the intensity decreased. It became clear this was no longer a rescue operation, but an attempt to find a body for the family. We returned home, devastated and broken. Our world had collapsed. Jamie was declared drowned, though his body was never found. We held a memorial service at our church, placed a small headstone on the family plot at the cemetery. The stone was engraved with the inscription, "Jamie Anderson, beloved son and brother, forever in our hearts." The following months passed in a fog of despair. Grief nearly destroyed our marriage and family. Tom withdrew into himself, worked even more, as if trying to drown the pain in constant busyness. He blamed himself for leaving the children unattended, even though it was only for 15 minutes. I fell into deep depression. For months, I couldn't sleep, eat, or function normally. Everything reminded me of Jamie, his toys, his room, his favorite food in the refrigerator. I was tormented by what-if questions. What if I hadn't let the children go in the water? What if I'd gone with Tom to the car? What if we'd chosen a different place to vacation? But Emily suffered most of all. She was only 8 years old and didn't understand where her little brother had gone. She blamed herself for not watching him, even though Tom and I constantly told her she was a child and bore no responsibility for what happened. Emily began having nightmares, refused to go swimming, became afraid of water. We took her to a child psychologist who helped her cope with the most acute manifestations of the trauma, but a deep sense of guilt stayed with her for life. A year after the tragedy, I learned I was pregnant. This was unexpected. Tom and I hadn't even thought about another child so soon after losing Jamie. At first, I was scared. How could we rejoice in new life when we hadn't yet recovered from our loss? But gradually, we understood that a new child wouldn't replace Jamie, but could give us hope for the future. When Michael was born, he brought light into our darkened world. We loved him madly, but always remembered that he had an older brother he would never meet. Emily adored baby Michael, but was overprotective. She constantly checked if he was breathing, wouldn't leave him during bath time, was panicked about losing another brother. This hypervigilance and sense of responsibility shaped her character for life. Years passed. Michael grew into a cheerful, healthy boy. We tried to create a normal childhood for him, but Jamie's shadow was always with us. His photos hung in the house. We celebrated his birthdays, told Michael about the older brother he never knew. Tom and I learned to live with the pain. It never completely went away, but became more bearable. We went to a family therapist who helped us through the hardest times and saved our marriage. Many couples don't survive the loss of a child, but we found a way to support each other. Emily grew up to be a serious, responsible girl and then woman. She graduated high school with honors, went to university for psychology. She said she wanted to help children and families experiencing trauma. We understood this was her way of coping with her own pain and guilt. She became a child psychologist, married a good man, had 2 children, a girl and a boy. But I always felt that deep down, she had never been able to fully forgive herself for that day at the lake. This shadow lay over her entire life. A few months ago, Emily told me that colleagues at work had become fascinated with genetic testing. It had become a trendy thing. People wanted to learn about their roots, ethnic background, predisposition to various diseases. One of Emily's friends discovered she had Irish roots the family didn't know about. Another learned about a predisposition to diabetes and started watching her diet. A third even found a distant relative in California, and now they correspond and plan to meet. Emily became interested in this idea. She thought it would be interesting to learn more about our family roots, maybe find some distant relatives. Our family had always been small, and genealogy was never our strong suit. She ordered a test from one of the major companies, submitted a saliva sample, and forgot about it for several weeks. The results came by email this morning. Emily opened them at breakfast, expecting to see the usual information about ancestry and possibly a list of distant relatives. Instead, she saw something that turned her world upside down. In the list of close relatives was listed a brother with a 99.9% probability match. David Clark, 43 years old, Vermont. Emily reread the results several times, thinking it was a system error. She knew she had only one brother, Michael, who was 35. And there had been Jamie, who died in childhood. There couldn't be anyone else. She began studying David's profile. Birth year, 1981, exactly like Jamie. The profile had a blurry photo of a middle-aged man with dark hair. Something about his features seemed familiar, but she couldn't understand what exactly. Emily couldn't concentrate on work all day. She kept returning to the test results, rereading the information, trying to find a logical explanation. Maybe this was her father's illegitimate child? Maybe a family secret no one knew about. But the more she thought about it, the more convinced she became that the age matched. 2 exactly. If her father had had an affair and an illegitimate child, he would have been born the same year as Jamie. This seemed like an incredible coincidence. By evening, Emily decided to write David a message through the company's platform. She introduced herself and cautiously asked if he knew anything unusual about his background. She mentioned that the system showed them as full siblings, which seemed impossible. David responded within an hour. He wrote that he too was surprised by the result, but had considered such a possibility. He told her that his mother, shortly before her death, had confessed to him that he wasn't their biological son. She said they had found him as a small child, and their own son of the same age had recently died, and they decided it was a sign. But she gave no more details, no age, no place, no date. David tried to find out the truth through various services, but according to all documents, he was completely the legal son of the Clarks. He assumed he'd been adopted in infancy or something like that. David honestly admitted he'd taken the DNA test specifically hoping to find his biological family, but hadn't expected such a turn. Deep down, he hoped his mother had been delirious before death, and the strange story was a product of her sick imagination. Over the years since he'd taken the test, David had only received very distant matches, relatives in the 4th, 5th, 6th degree, people who possibly had common ancestors several centuries ago. He'd contacted some of them, but couldn't learn anything useful. Emily suggested a video call. David agreed, but warned that he didn't understand the situation either. They arranged to talk that evening. When David's face appeared on the screen at the appointed time, Emily's breath caught. These were the same brown eyes as Jamie's, the same nose shape as their father's, the same smile, only adult, masculine. David looked confused and agitated. He began telling his story slowly, carefully, as if afraid to believe what he was saying. He told his story. He had grown up in the Clark family in a remote part of Vermont, but in his teenage years began integrating into normal life. He finished high school, got forestry education. Now he was married to a kind woman. They had 2 children, a son and daughter. He lived not far from where he grew up, worked as a ranger in a national park. He had no memories of life before 5 or 6 years old. The Clarks told him he was their son, that he had been seriously ill in early childhood and had forgotten much because of it. But all his life, he'd had strange, fragmentary memories, dreams about water, about some girl, about faces he couldn't see clearly. The Clarks convinced him these were just nightmares, results of childhood illness. Father Clark died when David was a little over 20. Mother lived longer, but about 10 years ago, before her death, she told him the truth. She said he wasn't their biological son, that they had found him small. She gave no more details, no age, place, or date. She simply said she loved him like her own and never regretted taking him in. David first thought the old woman was delirious before death, but these words haunted him and wouldn't let him rest. He'd always had fragmentary, strange memories from early childhood. Dreams about water, about some other people, about a girl whose face he couldn't make out. The Clarks explained this as consequences of a serious illness he'd suffered in early childhood. After his mother's death, David had taken a DNA test, not because he believed her words, but rather to dispel doubts. He thought the test would show normal results, and he could forget about the strange deathbed confession. But years passed, and there were no close matches, only distant relatives who weren't much help. David almost forgot about the test, dismissed his mother's words as illness and old age. And now, 10 years later, the system had shown him a sister. Emily told him about that day at Lake George. about how a 5-year-old boy named Jamie had disappeared, about the search that lasted a week, about how the family had considered him dead all these years. David listened, and in his eyes were surprise, pain, and something like relief. Finally, the strange fragments of his childhood memories began forming a picture. He began telling what he remembered. Cold water, panic when his feet stopped reaching the bottom, the feeling of something catching and carrying him, fighting for air, then darkness. His next clear memory, the Clarks' faces, their small house in the forest, a feeling of safety and warmth. They told him he was their son David, that he had been sick and forgotten much. During the conversation, other details emerged. David had contacted the younger sister of Mother Clark, who was still alive and living in a nursing home. The elderly woman, learning about the DNA test and found family, decided to tell the whole truth. She remembered that day in August 1986. The Clarks then lived in an old house by the river that flowed from Lake George, about 20 miles downstream from the lake. They didn't watch the news, didn't communicate with neighbors, didn't know about the missing child. They were reclusive people who avoided society, living practically as hermits. They had a son, David, who was born in 1981 but died of pneumonia when he was only 4 years old. The Clarks buried him themselves on their land, not telling anyone about the death. They didn't trust authorities and the system, preferred to handle everything themselves. That morning, the day after news reported a child missing in the lake, Old Man Clark went to the river to check fishing nets and found a small boy on the shore. The child was alive, but in a state of deep shock, wet, cold, frightened. He couldn't clearly answer questions, only remembered his name was something starting with J. He couldn't give his last name, address, or parents' names. The Clarks decided this was the same child the news was talking about. But they also decided not to report it to authorities. First, they didn't trust the system. Second, the loss of their own son was still a fresh wound, and the found boy seemed like a gift of fate. They still had all the documents of their deceased David. The age matched almost perfectly. A difference of a few months wasn't critical. They decided the found boy would become their new David. The child was traumatized and remembered nothing clearly. At 5 years old, children adapt quite easily to new circumstances, especially if old memories are blocked by trauma. The Clarks were kind people, though strange. They surrounded the boy with care and love, but also completely isolated him from the outside world. They told him the outside world was cruel and dangerous, that their family should live separately from everyone. David grew up in this isolation for the first years. The Clarks taught him at home, told him about nature, taught him to hunt, fish, survive in the forest. But when he became a teenager, he began going out into the world more, traveling to town, talking to people, later going to high school, though without much enthusiasm for social life. When Father Clark died, David was 23 years old. He was already living separately with his family, not far from the Clark's house, but regularly visited his adoptive mother, took care of her. Mother Clark lived many more years, but toward the end of her life began remembering the past more often. Sometimes she looked at David with a strange look, as if she wanted to say something, but didn't dare. In her last days, when it became clear she was dying, the old woman finally decided on honesty. Maybe conscience tormented her. Maybe she wanted to give David a chance to learn the truth about himself. She told him about that morning by the river, about the found boy, about their decision to make him their son. She said she loved him like her own, that she never regretted her decision for a day. But she also said that somewhere there were people who might still be looking for him. David was shocked. Part of him wanted not to believe it, to consider it pre-death delirium. But another part, the one that had always doubted, always felt something wasn't right, knew it was true. After his mother's funeral, he thought long about what to do with this information. He had a wife, children, work, a normal life. But somewhere there might be people who considered him dead, but continued to hope. He tried to find information through various services, but without specific data. When, where, under what circumstances he was found, it was impossible. According to all official documents, he was the legal son of the Clarks. He took a DNA test, but there were no results for years. David almost resigned himself to the thought that he would never learn the truth. Maybe the family he came from no longer existed. Maybe no one was alive anymore. And now, 10 years later, he was talking to a woman who claimed to be his sister. A woman who was telling the story of a 5-year-old boy who disappeared in a lake exactly when the Clarks found him by the river. Emily cried during the video call. She looked at this man's face and saw the features of her little brother, grown up and matured. For 43 years, she had lived with guilt, thinking she hadn't watched Jamie properly that fateful day. Now it turned out he had been alive all this time. David also cried, though he tried to hold back. All his life he had felt emptiness, a sense that something important was lost or forgotten. Now he knew what exactly: his first family, his real name, his place in the world. They talked until late into the night. They compared memories, looked for coincidences, tried to reconstruct the picture of what had happened 38 years ago. Gradually, the story came together. Jamie really had been caught in an underwater current that carried him from the family's vacation spot to the river mouth. By some miracle, he didn't drown, made it to shore, or was thrown there by the current. Trauma and shock blocked most of his memories. The Clarks found him the next day and made a decision that forever changed the lives of 2 families. They saved the child, but condemned his birth family to decades of grief. Emily asked David if he was angry at the Clarks for not returning him to his family. David thought long about the answer. On one hand, they deprived him of childhood with his real parents, deprived Emily of her brother and his parents of their son. On the other hand, they saved his life and gave him love. He said he couldn't judge them too harshly. They were strange people, but not evil. Perhaps they really thought they were doing the right thing. Perhaps they were afraid the system wouldn't believe their story or would take the child away. Emily told him how their family had changed after losing Jamie, about their mother's depression, their father's withdrawal, her own guilt, about Michael's birth, and how the new child helped the family find strength to live on. David listened and understood that his disappearance had caused enormous pain to people he didn't remember, but who had loved him. This was hard to realize, but also gave him understanding of where he came from. They arranged to meet. David was supposed to come the following weekend. Emily wanted to first prepare her parents for this meeting, especially her mother. At 75, such news could be too big a shock. After talking with David, Emily called her father. Tom, who was now 77, didn't believe it at first. Like me, he kept repeating it was impossible, there must be an error. But when Emily sent him David's photo, he was silent for a long time. Then he said he could see features of his missing son in this face. the same eyes, the same nose. A masculine, adult version of the face he remembered as 5 years old. Emily also called her younger brother Michael. The reaction was similar. Shock, disbelief, then slow acceptance of incredible truth. Michael had heard stories about his older brother all his life, whom he'd never known. Now it turned out this brother was alive and they would soon meet. And now Emily was calling me to tell me this impossible news. My son, whom I had mourned for 38 years, was alive. My little Jamie had grown up and become a man named David. I sat in my bedroom, holding the phone with trembling hands, unable to believe what I was hearing. Emotions overwhelmed me. Joy, grief, relief, anger, love, all at once. Tears flowed down my cheeks, and I didn't try to stop them. My boy was alive. All these years, while I mourned him, put flowers on an empty grave, remembered him on birthdays and death anniversaries, he was living his life in the forests of Vermont. I thought about the Clarks. Part of me was grateful to them for saving Jamie, giving him a home and love. But another part couldn't forgive them for stealing 38 years from us. 38 years we could have spent together as a family. Emily explained that David would come on Saturday. We agreed to meet at her house, neutral territory where everyone would be more comfortable. Tom would come too, and Michael with his family. The remaining days until the meeting passed like a fog. I couldn't sleep or eat normally. I constantly thought about what I would say to the son I hadn't seen for almost 40 years. How to explain to him that we never stopped loving him? How to tell him about years of pain and hope? I got out old photos of Jamie, looked at his childish face, tried to imagine how he might look as an adult. The photo of David that Emily sent showed a man with kind eyes and a calm face. Features of our family could indeed be seen in him. Friday night, I barely slept. Thoughts spun in my head. My heart beat so hard, I was afraid it wouldn't withstand such stress. Tomorrow, I would see my son for the first time in 38 years. Saturday came, sunny and warm. I spent a long time choosing what to wear, as if it mattered. Finally, I settled on a simple blue dress. Jamie had always loved blue. Tom picked me up at 1:30. We barely talked on the way to Emily's. What could be said at such a moment? Words seemed insufficient for what we were feeling. An unfamiliar car with Vermont plates was already parked at Emily's house. My heart beat even harder. He was here. My son was here, just yards away from me. Emily met us at the door. She looked excited but happy. Behind her, I saw a tall man with dark hair and familiar brown eyes. Time stopped. I looked at this stranger and saw my little boy. The same eyes, the same smile, only adult. The same gestures I remembered from childhood. David looked at me with the same surprise and excitement. He took an uncertain step forward, and I couldn't stand it. I rushed to him and hugged him so tight, as if afraid he would disappear again. He hugged me back, and I felt the tension of recent days finally leaving. My son had come home, not the little boy I remembered him as, but an adult man, but my son. We both cried. Tom came over and also hugged David. Our family was reunited for the first time after almost 40 years of separation. Michael arrived with his wife and children a little later. The meeting of the two brothers was especially touching. Michael had heard stories about his older brother all his life, and now this brother stood before him, alive and real. We spent the whole day telling each other stories, filling in the gaps of 38 years. David told us about life with the Clarks, about the Forest House, about his work as a ranger. We told him how the family had grown after his disappearance, about Michael, about grandchildren he'd never known. It was painful to realize how much we had missed. High school graduation, wedding, birth of grandchildren, all the important moments of life had passed us by. But there was also relief that he was alive, that he had started a family, that now we had a chance for the future. David said he had always felt something was missing in his life, even though he had a loving wife and children. Now he understood what he had been looking for: a connection to his biological family, answers to questions about his origin. We agreed we would stay in touch, meet regularly, gradually restore relationships. This wouldn't be easy. Too many years had passed, too much had happened, but we were ready to try. We also decided not to raise old issues with authorities. The Clarks were no longer alive, and we didn't want to waste energy on the past. It was more important to focus on the future, on becoming a family again. David decided to officially take the name Jamie as a middle name to honor the memory of the boy he had been. He remains David in everyday life, but now he's also Jamie, our lost and found son. Our family story got a second chance. We lost 38 years, but we have a future. Time can't be returned, but love has no expiration date. Family bonds proved stronger than time, stronger than circumstances, stronger even than death. My son came home, not as I remembered him, but as he became. And this is a miracle I will never stop treasuring. Miracles happen. Sometimes what's lost returns. Sometimes families reunite in the most incredible ways. And sometimes a mother's heart, which never stopped loving and hoping, receives a reward beyond all expectations. My Jamie is alive, and he's home.